introduction. Thank you for the invitation, Susanne, Bente, and Andrea and Carolina. I'm excited to be here. It's wonderful to see such a big group of people who are pretty interested in archiving and will spend the whole day. I felt quite alone for many years, coming out of the same generation as Susanne, where archiving was not the hot topic. And being one of those people who actually thought it was really interesting to work in the archives, and there were all kinds of very interesting questions that rose out of that, and all kinds of questions about my own practice, and also all kinds of questions about how to work with the art form from the past, in the present, and towards the future. So, since my contribution to the publication already addresses the topic of artists' archives from the perspective of dance, I will sidestep a little now and talk about the interlinked topics of dance artists in the archives, dance artists as archives, and dancing with the archives. All of which lead up to a brief introduction to the research project Knowing in Motion, Dance Body Archive, that I'm conducting now, and it's a 3-year project from 2023 to 2026. So please change the slide. So you have already introduced me amply. I think this may be just to say that I'm representing, as you say, the academic side today, but I'm also representing a perspective on academia that has one leg in the practice, or has a lot of interest in the practice. I have, during my studies, worked in the archives of the Royal Danish Theatre while I was still dancing, and have, for the past 20 years, been on the staff of the section of Theatre and Performance Studies at the university. My theoretical interests move across dance historiography, decolonial and queer archival theory, as well as critical heritage studies, with a focus on site-specific performance and embodied memory practices. In later years, my research has been increasingly focused on practice-based investigations in dance and choreography. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. Next slide, please. On more than one occasion, I have been asked why this interest in dance archives and archiving. At this time of global crisis, such as the one we're living in now, what is the relevance? In my answer, I align myself with Sully Olnik, who's a Brazilian psychoanalyst and cultural theorist. Olnik calls out the micropolitics of neoliberal capitalism, which in her words is in the process of successfully pimping, she calls it, the creative and social human life drive. Her proposition for how to decolonize the unconscious involves a return to the knowing body. I subscribe to Olnik's decolonial quest, and as I will suggest in this presentation, one way to work with the knowing body is to dance with the archives. Looking more broadly at performing arts and the academic disciplines within which I work, one of the main concerns, as voiced in 1985 by Richard Schechner, the founder of performance studies, was to develop a vocabulary and a methodology that would deal with performance in its immediacy and evanescence, which means disappearance. Among numerous performance scholars who have since theorized the liveness and ephemerality of performance, we find Peggy Phelan, who in her famous essay from 1993 called The Ontology of Performance, claims that performance is an art that becomes itself through disappearance. The same can be and has been said of dance and choreography, which, it has been argued, this is something which it has been argued has trapped the art forms in a perpetual here and now, not able to move before or after, not having an afterlife. The archival turn in performance studies, which may be seen as a response to this widely accepted definition, has since had several renditions. For instance, the important Performance Studies International Conference in Copenhagen in 2008, and the resulting anthology Performing Archives and Archives of Performance, edited by Gunhild Borggren and Karen Vedel from 2013. Next slide, please. So this thing about getting lost in the archives, I mean, you can work in the archives and not get lost. You can work in the archives and enjoy being embedded without having the fear of being lost, but just enjoying that attraction and the affective encounter with archival material. But there are also more utilitarian ways to work with archives. I have chosen 3 examples. I could have chosen many others. I see in the space here today we have Grygs, who has worked extensively, Gryvor Hallberg, with Sisters Hope's archives as part of her PhD project. There's also Live Art Archive, which is a very important and unique archive internationally with all its assembled materials. And I'm sure that there are others that I will not mention here, but I think that there are really a lot of very important archives that have been artists who have been self-archiving or archiving parts of an art form that show also that there's an interest here and that there's some kind of a sense of importance. Next slide, please. Repertoire theatres tend to be more vigilant in terms of documentation because they rely on their archives to have their productions available for restagings, either by themselves or by others. So there could also be a commercial interest. One such example is the trust of the former Merce Cunningham Company, who acts as custodian of the Merce Cunningham Legacy Plan, which was drawn up before the choreographer's death in 2009. The complete archives from the company's 50-some-year-long history hold several hundred works by Merce Cunningham, as well as other materials such as administrative files. My interest in relation to the trust has been focused on the role of ex-company dancers in creating the so-called dance capsules, which is a selection of 80 choreographies that can be accessed at different levels. The most superficial is for the view of the general public. I think that's the one here. I have guest preview access to the assets in this capsule, so I can get some idea of what's in there. I can get some listings of the items that are there, some snippets of video, maybe some costume drawings, some very not very superficial, but just an idea. There are 2 other levels here, one is a level that has to do that is accessible to teachers who can get a license to access that material as teachers, and the last level is for researchers and those who wish to produce a work. An interview that I had with the licensing director, Trish Lent, revealed that the list of works was made with a high degree of participation from the former Merce Cunningham dancers, in the sense that Lent, who had herself been a member of the company, would ask 2 to 3 dancers from each of these 5 decades to nominate which dancers should be archived. To the resulting list of approximately 45 dancers considered to be the most important, everyone added a few landmark dancers from across the decades, resulting in the final list of the 80 works, each of which has its own capsule. Speaking with Trish Lent also allowed me the opportunity to ask about the choreographic notes in the capsules, which hold a variety of materials, the combination of which depends on the available technologies at the time of the creation of the choreography. Typically, these capsules would include visuals, photos and filmed recordings, notes and sketches of costumes and scenography. According to Lent, many capsules also have these choreographic notes from Merce Cunningham's hands, but they can be challenging to read, she says, because of his way of notating, and also be challenging to make sense of, as they are not intended as a score. Rather, they are ideas. Moreover, due to Merce Cunningham's use of chance operations, the sequencing of choreographic materials was often kept alive until the very end. This is an example of a trust that has a commercial interest, but also makes this material available for research. As Patricia Lent and the trust director also let us know, the expertise that is involved in working with and disseminating this material for people who want to produce it has an exit date. After 25 years or so, everybody who has that expertise will no longer be there. There are also processes for working with the choreographic workshops, materials, and sort of sourcing out what versions, how to work with it. There are no finalized versions, which is also in the line of Merce Cunningham's thinking, that you should not finalize a work too harshly. So the second example is dance reenactments. Please, next slide. So while the reconstructions and restagings constitute a well-established practices of dance artists in the archives, my second example is drawn from a more recent category of artistic practices, namely reenactments of dance and choreography. In the past 15 to 20 years, dance reenactments have been theorized as a historiographic method for dance scholars, also as an exploration into the logic of thinking through movement, as a challenge to the separation of temporal categories such as past, present, and future, and, as cultural theorist Randy Martin suggests, as a step toward as a step towards the end to ephemerality as a defining characteristic of the art form. He talks about post-ephemerality of the art form that is revealing itself through the work with reenactments. Andre Lepecki, dance scholar, suggests that one reenacts not to fix a work in its original form, but to unlock, release, and actualize a work's many virtual im and com possibilities, which the original version of the work kept in reserve. So the idea is that there is much more information in a work than what is actually seen on stage, and the choreography can reveal itself if you start working with it through methods of reenactment. Among numerous choreographers who have worked with reenactments, my slide points to Fabian Barber, born in Ecuador and trained at Parts. In preparation for a Mary Wigman dance evening consisting of 6 of Mary Wigman solos, Barber added body to the flat photographic images in the archives of Wigman's dances. The result was a performance structured in the modernist manner of the 1920s. Rather than try to iron out the inevitable discrepancies between Wigman's and his own version of the dances, the result highlighted the corporal gap between his living archive and Wigman's choreographic material. It also troubled spectatorial conventions of, for instance, when to clap in a performance. So in this sense, highlighting the differences. Next example, please. My third and last example of approaches taken by dance artists in the archives is a brief introduction to Tim Matiakis' return to further explore choreographic ideas and materials from the time of his artistic directorship of Corpus. The result of this work is the e-book Toolbox, generously made available online, beautifully laid out, and with video documentation tracking the different phases of the investigations. In terms of archival work, Matiakis consulted documentation in the shape of videos, observation notes from performances and rehearsals, and reflection notes from recurring investigations into his own practice. In the research that went into the production of Toolbox, Matiakis engaged in a mining of past choreographic material for what one with Lepecki could call still unexhausted possibilities of his work. In this process, an additional and very important archival resource was put into use, namely his own embodied archive. Next slide, please. Dance artists as archives. As a last stepping stone before speaking about the research project Now in Motion, I turn to second-generation performance studies scholars who suggest that to take performance seriously as one or several systems of learning, storing, and transmitting knowledge. In Diana Taylor's proposal to distinguish between the archive, next slide please, to distinguish between the archive and the repertoire, she defines archive as characterized by seemingly enduring entities, for instance texts, documents, buildings, and bones. Archival knowledge is perceived to exist independently of not only the knower, but also of time and place. It is there, and thought to be there, unchanging. By contrast, repertoire, in the terms of Taylor, refers to the corporeal forms of practice and knowing. For instance, in dance, sports, food cultures, rituals, etc. Actions that are considered fleeting and non-reproducible, and constantly evolving. Next slide, please. In a similar vein, Rebecca Schneider, also performance scholar, asks rhetorically, when privileging an understanding of performance as a refusal to remain, do we ignore other ways of knowing, other modes of remembering? Pointing back to Taylor's proposal. They come from different perspectives. She works with remains of war, as you see here, art and war in times of theatrical reenactment, whereas Taylor works with performance traditions, cultural performance traditions in the Americas. Next slide, please. And I turn one last time to Lepecki, who in a discussion of reenactments and the afterlives of dancers suggests that a body may always already have been nothing other than an archive. That is, a continuous amalgamation of techniques, movements, habits, as well as bits and pieces of repertoire that are being stored for later use. Next slide, please. These thoughts on dancers and dancers as archives bring me to the final part of my talk, in which, next slide, please. I briefly introduce the research project Knowing Emotion, Dance Body Archive. Rather than consider knowledge as separated from the knower, which as Taylor suggests is an idea underlying the conventional archival institution, the project title poses knowing as a doing. The project's aspiration is to contribute to bringing dance as one among a multitude of suppressed ways of knowing to the fore. Why? So we can expand the thinking about what constitutes and is valued as knowledge. And please look into our list of the research team, the collaborators, the artistic consultants, etc. Several of whom are in this room. So the main research question of Knowing in Motion, a Dance Body Archive reads, how may this is the wrong one, Benji. Oh, I will read the right one. That's okay. I must have thrown out the wrong one. It's my mistake. It's my mistake. I had corrected this. Okay, I will read. Don't look at that. Just it's a few words that have changed. Speaking of research questions that change. Yeah. So how may the encounters between dancers' corporeal insights, embodied traces of choreographic movement, and archival source materials contribute to knowing in and about dance? So we're talking about knowing in and about dance. The project is structured over 3 historic cases, each of which requires extensive archival research supplemented with interviews and the collection of materials from involved artists. During the project, each case is made the topic of a week-long workshop where the research team, consisting of Franziska Borg-Petersen, Anna Lavette, who's here today, and myself, are present together with 4 dancers, one of whom is also an artistic consultant. It could be Tim Mitjakis in the first case, and it could be Charlotte Broberg, second case. The artistic consultants with specific knowledge of the dance style we're working with. The other 2 artistic consultants, Carolina Beckmann and Andrea Ders from Danish Dance Stories, are involved with the members of the research team in setting up frameworks for the encounters that allow for different sub-questions in the research to be explored. During the workshop week, Carolina and Andrea will facilitate the practical tasks on which we have agreed and also provide a structure for the reflection space between the tasks. Everything is documented either on video, photos, or in sound. The notebooks with the dancers' reflections are collected at the end of the week and then serve as a base for supplement to our analysis afterwards. Next slide. Okay, whoops. I will edit. Yeah. The spread of 3 cases across a century means that we are looking at choreographic materials, of which the dancers may or may not have prior knowledge. The project, however, works from the premise that regardless whether it is one or the other, the encounter with the selected materials will generate some form of corporeal resonance. This is the first workshop relating to Emilie Valbom, a choreographer in the Royal Danish Theatre between 1905 and 1928. And let's move quickly to the next workshop. And here you can see, here you can see that the focus is on the materialities of the different kinds of archival material that we have: photos, costumes, choreographic notes, etc., sheet music. So there are different materialities in the space with us. Okay, and the next one, please. This is the second workshop where we centered on Doug Crutchfield. Here the focus was less on traces of choreography and more on the contexts for his teaching in Copenhagen between 1963 and 1985. While the dancers' response to the archival objects was still an interest, we were also attentive to, for instance, a memory recall of material properties of different dance studios and how these, moving within these frames and having the space recounted, could activate a corporeal response in the dancers who participated in the workshops. Today, next slide please, almost 2 years into the project, we're busy analyzing the data gathered in the 2 first workshops. It's both rich and rewarding. We're also in the process of planning the last workshop at the end of January. Do I have half a minute or? Yeah. So I think I will just wrap up here. In addition to this last workshop, we are planning also a conference, and we hope we will all be there. It will take place in Dronningsalen in the Royal Danish Library in September, on 10th of September, 2025. It will be a whole day conference, and we will know more about the project that we can tell you. It will also be a working kind of scene where we're still developing the material, but it will be with a lot of good people involved, just like today. Thank you.